name of God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. Please be seated. 10 years ago, I might have said about this gospel reading, man, I love it when Jesus breaks the rules, because it seems to give me permission to do that likewise. That was 10 years ago. Today, I say, man, I love it when Jesus breaks the rules, because it challenges my selfish rebelliousness. Today, we see two accounts of Jesus and his disciples not following to the letter of the law, the custom of the law. First, we see he and his disciples gleaning in the fields, which is not against the rules. It's actually mandated that be allowable for people to do in one of the 613 suggestions that God makes in the Old Testament. But then Jesus tells a story that might be foreign to some of us. He says, do you not know that when David and his companions were hungry, that they ate the bread of the presence, which was unlawful for them? Only the priests were supposed to eat the bread of the presence. So David and his companions, they're on the run from Saul. Saul is the current king. David has been anointed to be the new king, and there is a struggle for power going on, and David is on the run. And he and his companions are hungry, and he comes across Abiathar and says, we're hungry, and Abiathar, the priest, has the bread of the presence because that was a custom. There was a solid gold table in the tent. This was before the temple. There was a solid gold table, and every Sabbath on that table were to sit 12 loaves of unleavened bread that had been baked the day before. 2 piles of 6, and there was frankincense, incense sprinkled on top of these loaves on this solid gold table. And only the priests were to eat this bread. Remember, on the Sabbath, the custom was to do no work, to rest. Just as God rested on the seventh day, so we were intended to rest on the seventh day, to rest from our labors, everybody. And so there was a lot of preparation before the Sabbath began. And this was one of the preparations so that the priests would have food, but also be in a holy place for God. And so that bread of the presence was used to feed David and his companions. And it was a break in custom that was part of the scriptures and the history that Jesus knew and was living in, that history. Just wanted to demystify that for you in case you didn't. What is this bread of the presence he's talking about? And who is this guy with the weird name? Jesus is in the temple. After this encounter in the fields, now Jesus is in the temple. And they're watching, and they want to catch him, breaking the rules. And Jesus sees this man with a withered hand. And he asks the question, whether it is right to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath. To take life or to give life. Now, on a first glimpse at this reading, we might think that he's just posing a rhetorical question to the crowd of basically saying, should I heal this man's hand or not? That's what it looks like, right? Come forward, man with the withered hand, come forward, and then poses the question, what should I do about this withered hand? Should I heal it or not? Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? But I'm not sure that that's what he was talking about. He's asking the Pharisees and the temple authorities about the condition of their hearts. Because they're waiting. They're waiting to see what Jesus is going to do. And why are they waiting to see what Jesus is going to do? To see proof of the mighty acts of God alive in the world today? To bring new life to the temple, to Israel, to the whole world, to all the nations? Is that what they're waiting to see? Or are they waiting to catch him breaking the rules so that they might condemn and kill him? Jesus is asking them about the condition of their hearts and extrapolating from that the condition of the customs of the temple of the time. Are they being used to give life, or are they being used to self-propel and to self-protect? He's talking about the Pharisees, and this decision is theirs of what they will do on that Sabbath day. Will they give life, or will they seek to kill? And so this man with the withered hand, thank God he receives the restoration of that hand and that arm. But that withered hand is also a metaphor. It really is. Because what did it say in the Deuteronomy reading that Greg read to us this morning? This Deuteronomy reading that Jesus would have known. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day, to rest the hardness of our hearts and the self-service of many of us and our nature, to rest from that. So here is this withered hand in the midst of the temple as we are reminded of God's mighty hand. And Jesus says, stretch it out. Stretch out that withered hand, just as God stretched out his arm to bring the people out of bondage. As so often happens, the institution, the religious institution of Jesus' time had gotten off track and was missing the mark in so many ways. So my question today is this. As modern people of faith, how are our hands looking? What is the condition of our hearts? And if there is need of outstretching and new strength, are we focusing on the abstract and distant? Or are we looking at the imminent, the immediate, the concrete in our own midst? The Sabbath was made for man, and not man made for the Sabbath. Those are Jesus' words, and what he's saying is all of these customs and all of these rules that God has presented to us were put in place for our flourishing. Not so that we might have to navigate a maze where we'll get zapped for turning the wrong corner. The Sabbath, that rest that was mandated for us in the midst of slavery in Egypt, they had to rest. They had to get a break. We all have to get a break. We all have to rest. Rest is not just our right, it's in our very DNA. It's where our flourishing comes from. And when we miss out on it, true rest from machinations, rest from Machiavellian intent, our hearts and our hands wither. And so God comes in and shows us what true rest looks like and what we're made for. May we always be seeking the strength of God's mighty hand and the strength of our own. Through rest and through following the spirit of God's law, which is meant for our flourishing and not for our punishment. May the bread of presence feed us and give us strength. Amen.